evening, fellow Toastmasters and distinguished guests from District 120. TLA team is committed to bring variety of session to members of District 120. I hope you are doing great in the pandemic situation. I'm so glad to see many participants eagerly waiting to learn new things. I am Mahesh from CAT RMC Toastmaster Club. I'll be the master for the ceremony for today's program on how to script your speech. Writing a speech is not that all different than writing for other mediums. You need to know your audience, the required length, and the purpose or topic. This is true whether your speech is for a business conference, a wedding, a school project, or any other scenarios. But there is something about speech writing that's especially nerve-wracking. If you write and deliver a speech that does not go well, you will get a feedback in real time. The people sitting in front of you could lose interest, start talking and doze off, and even ban us out of the room. Don't worry, and only audience in movie throws tomatoes. Of course, a poor speech is not end of the world. You will get plenty of crummy speech and live to tell the tale. But we also know that a great speech is capable of changing the world, or at least sparking an audience imagination, putting a business into success, earning an A plus on your assignments, and ensuring that the bride and groom are still friends with you after the wedding. So, if you are stressed over the impending speech writing duties, fret no more. Today, we are breaking down for you the step by step process of exactly how to write a great speech. Before going to this session, to set up the ideal environment, let's invite Satish Menon, co-founder of Third Best Solution and program quality director of District 120. Over to you, Satish Menon.
Thank you, Toastmaster Mahesh, and good evening to all my fellow Toastmasters uh, who have gathered together to listen to this very entertaining and informative session on speech writing. A lot of people have asked us in the TLI team as to why did we do this session on speech writing. Isn't it so very obvious that every Toastmaster who goes to a club, Toastmasters club, has to write a speech? So why is that you are doing a specialized uh, session on speech writing? There are a couple of things why we are kind of doing a specialized session. The first one is all of us strongly believe that speeches are what makes up the content of any Toastmasters meeting. Even if there is no prepared speech, we still do table topics, which is still a form of speech. So without speech, there wouldn't be a Toastmasters meeting at all. And without speeches which are not being crafted properly, the meetings will not be informative, the meetings will not be entertaining, and the meetings will not derive the value that members look to derive out of Toastmasters. So, which is why writing speeches is very, very important. And please don't confuse speeches with the speeches that you give when you're contesting. Those also are important, but what one needs to understand is how do I craft my speech as part of my educational journey in Toastmasters. That is what is very important. And another important reason why we are doing this session is a lot of you will recollect that we did a survey a month back, which was rolled out to all the members. and we had certain key inputs which came out as part of the survey, and guidance on how to craft a speech was one of the top three requirements that came back from the members as part of the survey. So what we are doing today is just addressing that need of members to train you into something which will help you become a better speaker. So please make good use of this training. Toastmaster Hema, who's doing the training today, she's a seasoned Toastmaster. She's been a district champion of District 82. She's got all the right credentials to present this session. I would encourage all of you to learn from her experiences on how to craft a speech. Please ask all the questions that you can ask, because you would never get an opportunity like this every day. Have all your doubts cleared and go back as better speakers with more enlightenment at the end of this session. This definitely is not going to be the only session that we are going to do on this subject. There will be other sessions also as the days and months progress, but this is the beginning. So please enjoy the training, listen from a champion speaker as to what goes into crafting a good speech, ask all the questions that come to your mind, and enjoy the learning. Thank you and all the very best. Back to you, Toastmaster Mahesh.
Wow, that's a great ideal environment. You set it up ideal environment, Satishman. So before starting the session, if you have any queries, please do put it in the chat so that we will answer you all the questions at the end of the session. Our session will be given by Hemamalini Jain, got a master degree in structural engineering. She works as a structural engineer in L&T construction, member of L&T ECC Toastmaster Club, a avid Toastmaster, competitive communicator, advanced leadership bronze, award-winning speaker, co-founder and head of operation at Crayon Box, a great content writer, a digital marketer, and corporate and campus training. Let's put our hands welcoming Hemamali. How to you, Hemamali?
Thank you so much, Toastmaster Mahesh. So, a very good evening, District 120. Middle of the week, it's probably the time where we kind of dip on our enthusiasm. I hope I won't accelerate your dip in enthusiasm. But before we get started with how to script your speech, I'll lay some ground rules, some very basic rules. Okay. So, when it comes to scripting a speech, I think it's very similar to having a baby. By that, I mean, when you have a baby, you basically conceive the baby, just the way you conceive that thought to write that speech. And then you nurture that baby for a time period, just the way you nurture that script, you nurture that content and have it for a certain time amount. You work on it, rework on it, and then you have it ready. But just like the baby that will not come to life until you deliver it, a speech will not come to life until that moment you go on stage and deliver it. But today's topic is going to be a little off limits when it comes to the delivery part. So we're going to avoid those three taboo topics, which is body language, vocal variety, and stage usage, stagecraft over here in this session, and strictly stick only to the scripting part of it, or rather the content part of it, which goes in before you go on stage to deliver the speech. Now, like our PQD, Toastmaster Satish happened to mention, not all speeches will have to be crafted with the mindset that it's supposed to be a contest speech. But if you can give it the same care and if you can give it the same love, I'm sure all of our speeches, every single one of it, would be worthy of being in a contest. So with that said, I'm going to open the floor to a little bit of interaction. I want you all to give me, what do you think is the basic elements that's there in a speech? What are those basic elements? Just get going. Just type it in the chat box. I will just read out the chart now. There's a story. So what else? What is the basic elements that a speech has? So there's an idea, there's a title. So there's a core message. Great. There's message, there's flow to the speech. So what else are the elements? There's a conclusion, there's an intro, body, conclusion, there's a structure given to the speech. Yes, I think we're constantly getting intro, body, conclusion. Someone said flow, someone's giving me transition between the parts. There's thought that goes into it, emotions, so context. So I have a content. Okay, the context setting, I assume there's a message. So all of us are, I think we can combine it together and say that there's a core message. And when you structure your speech around that core message, it has that introduction, body, conclusion, the opening, body, conclusion. And then you add in a few elements. There's a lot of other elements that's there, and we had a lot of answers. And I'm sure that all of us know this basic structure, this OBC that Toastmasters, or rather anywhere where you see a content to be scripted, has. There's an opening, there's a body, there's a conclusion, and the fourth and the most important part of the speech is the transition. So you all spoke about the transition from one part of the speech to the other as well, or rather between these three important parts. Now, I think you all know so much about the basic structure that's there. Now, tell me, what are the different types in which you can organize this structure? Now, you've come to this understanding that it has an opening, a body, conclusion. How can you organize it? I think to put it in plain words, if you're aware of the legacy system, I'm basically asking you what a CC2 teaches you. How do you organize your speech? Your speech can be organized based on different ways. So what, according to your understanding, if you don't know what the legacy system is, even if you're a pathway Toastmaster, how do you think you can organize your speech? Your speech can be organized based on a few ways. I'll give you an example. Like, for example, I'm going to talk about 5 ways in which you can keep your kitchen clean. So I'm basically going to talk about 5 different topics in which you can, oh, great. So someone said topical. So I was about to go for topical as well. There's cause and effect. So keep those answers coming. There's cause and effect, where someone says this is the cause, and then there's an effect. And then there's spatial. Now, when there's spatial, they're talking about different geographies where it depends on the location. Like, for example, in the kitchen, if I'm going to talk about cabinets first, this space, and then I move on to talk about the sink area, and then I move on to the utility area, and then I move on to the stove top, and then I move on to all of the shelves that's there. So it's spatial. So that's another kind of way you can organize your content. One is topical, like I said. So I can talk about the spaces. These can be the topic itself, or the topics can be something else altogether. Cause and effect, what are the different causes of global warming and what is the effect of something that's happening, something like that. There's chronological, where I talk about first you've got to do this. Let's say cleaning the kitchen. So first you basically, when you have to clean it, let's say you leave the detergent, the soap liquid on everywhere, and then you let it stay for some time. And then what's the second thing that you do? You start scrubbing it. The third thing that you do, you start bleaching it, or whatever be the step. You talk about what happens first, what comes next, what goes third, in a chronological order. That's one way of doing it. Someone said sequences. Wonderful. Sequences, again, the chronological order in which you can do things. So what else? What are the other ways in which you can do it? There's symptom, causes, solutions, right? So symptoms, causes, solutions. When you talk about solution, there's a problem and then there's a solution. So you talk about problems and then you talk about solutions, and you talk about what are the causes and then you talk about the effects. So your speech can be, by and large, combined in all of these things. Now you have different topics, like, say, for example, 5 ways in which I can clean my kitchen can be one thing. Or I can talk about 5 reasons why you should plant trees. And I talk about what are those 5 different things. Because if these things don't go right, there's going to be an effect to all of these causes. I can put it in a cause and effect way. Or I can talk about 5 problems that's there in the world and tell you that these things can have a solution if you plant trees. It can go that way. Or I can use the same thing in a topical way by saying, in order to plant trees, these are the different topics as to why I think you should do that. It need not be cause and effect. It need not be, problem solution. But you can organize your speech by and large in these things. And I think all of you have a lot of understanding about how this thing is supposed to go, which is why I am not going to be concentrating on the basic structure a speech would have. Rather, I'm going to go a little bit into those few tips, tricks, and techniques that I picked up in Toastmasters while I started scripting my speeches, especially in the contest. And I thought I'd share with you today five tips, tricks, and techniques to take your speech to another level as to how to impactfully script your speech. So before I start with how to do that, can I have all the audience say you're with me up to this moment? Say yes.
Yes,
Can I hear
with you.
Yes. Yes.
Yes,
Thank
with
you
you.
so much.
Yeah. Yeah.
Thank you so much. Thank you. So,
Yes.
Yeah.
yes, great. So let's begin with how to begin scripting. Now, my first thing that I have for you, my tip number one, my tip, trick, or technique, you can put it into whatever bucket you feel like putting this into. The first thing that I have for you is I'm going to begin by talking about how do you begin to script your speech. Now, I want to know from you how you begin scripting. Which part do you start your scripting from? Give me your answers. I mean, each person has their own way. So I want to know how you script. Give me a few answers. And I'll just see what's there in the chat. Yes. Where do you start your scripting? You decide the core area and develop from it by personal experience. And by that, I mean you have a story. You start with a story. So there's someone who starts with the outline of the script. Just write whatever comes to your mind. You start introducing yourself. Great. So rather, it's like the introduction of the speech itself. So you work on the body first, go to the conclusion, and then the introduction. So someone starts with conclusion first. So someone says, identify core message, layers around core message, what needs to be conveyed, posing a question to the audience, or in other simple words, the opening of the speech. What's the main subject, main points, if informative, or rather the substantiating points, that's the body you're talking about, the dramatic beginning, objective of the script, suspense in a story. Okay, so I have very mixed answers. Different people begin it in different ways. But if you remember 7 Habits of Highly Effective People by Stephen Covey, I think this one habit can be a habit that a highly effective speaker can also possess. Now, before you start with the introduction, body, and conclusion, what we really forget is what a few of them had mentioned, which is to begin with the end in mind. At the end of the day, what are you going to write about? What is your introduction going to be? Imagine you decide to give a speech on, lasers. Would you start introducing about your pet cat? Or if you're going to talk about, let us say, some topics, let's talk about textile industry in India. Are you going to decide, even before you talk about what's the textile industry in India, or if that's the topic, are you going to decide on what is exactly the way I want to convey the message? I want to talk about a humorous speech. Now, let me talk about the textile industry in India, because humorous speech, I've chosen humorous speech. Now, let me just go and kind of find my core message. How does it really work? At the end of the day, no matter what we say, this is where we begin the speech. It always starts with that one thought. Like I said, you conceive the speech first, and that conception happens with that one core message. And like someone beautifully pointed out, it's one concept, one core message, and you build layers around that. So my very first tip for you all is to begin with the end in mind. And remember that this end has to be there throughout your scripting process. So you start by thinking about the end. What's the one thing I want my audience to go home with? What is that one thing that I want my audience to remember? What am I leaving my audience with? What am I trying to tell out of the story? Now, someone told me personal experience. Let's say you experience something really, startling, and you think, I want to share this with my audience. But at the end of the day, why do you want to share that? Because that incident sparked something in you. let's say you got duped by this fake call agency and you gave them your credentials and you lost a little bit of money. You want to share it with your audience because you don't want your audience to be conned. So at the end of the day, even if you think you're planning to share your personal experience, you still have in mind that one core message that you want to share with your audience. What is even better is you have clarity that this is what you want to share with your audience. Be a little more conscious and have the end in mind right when you begin scripting your speech. Now ask yourself, what is that one thing you want to share with your audience? I get it. This is a little confusing. Now I say, what's the one thing that you want to share with your audience? And Hema, you said you're going to share with me 5 tips and tricks and techniques. So my core objective today is to share with you how to script a speech. That's my one core objective. How do I achieve it? The substantiating points and the layers that I build around that core message. That is the 5 tips, tricks, and techniques. If you have a 7-minute available to you, plan 3 ways in which you can do organic farming. Talk about 3 different techniques that you can give to your audience, 3 reasons why they should buy that product. Those 3 things constitute the body, the layers built around the core message, which is going to be the one thing that you want to leave your audience with. So your first thing is begin with the end in mind. Now you've fixed your final outcome. This is what you want to leave your audience with. You've decided, this is the message. I want to leave my audience feel so inspired to wake up early in the morning. You've decided that one thing. What do you do next? You start building those layers. And when you start building those layers, all of us kind of build those layers. But there's more times than not us lacking a little bit of that impact in our speeches. Sometimes, or in a few cases, most of the times, we always find ourselves in that position where we always fall short of that perfect speech. What is that real difference between a speech that's good and a speech that's great? And that is going to be my next 4 simple techniques that you can follow. Now, the second thing that I have for you today, it reminds me of this little snippet that I happened to read. So there once was this preacher. He was very beautifully delivering his sermon, and he's there talking his heart out, going on talking and preaching. And after the sermon is over, there's a man who walks up to him and says, you are better than Einstein. Now the preacher is completely flattered. He's like, I mean, I didn't do a lot to deserve that, but thank you, but I really didn't do a lot to deserve that. Now this guy says, no, of course you deserve it. Because when Einstein came up with the theory of relativity, a few people understood it. But when you delivered that sermon, you made sure nobody understood anything. So that's exactly what I get reminded of when I think of this second point. My second point is what the Virgin man once said and always believed. KISS, or rather KISS. Keep it short and simple. Now, the Virgin man, Sir Richard Branson, might be a lot of things that we remember today. But what he was as a kid, he was dyslexic as a kid. And back then, dyslexia was not something so popularly known. Thanks to Tare Zameen Par, most of us know what dyslexia is. But if not, dyslexia is a disorder that kids have where they have difficulty in reading, writing, spelling, or even understanding concepts. So Sir Richard Branson was dyslexic as a kid, and he had real trouble understanding concepts. In his school, he was considered stupid by a few, and he was considered lazy by a few. So he was really bullied and beaten up. So he had to drop out of school. As a 15-year-old dropout, he still had confidence in himself, thinking that he'd definitely make it big one day. But what he didn't know is his disorder would really make a difference and give him an advantage in the market. Why? Because all of Virgin's campaigns were centered around this one concept, which is keep it short and simple. Richard Branson never gave anybody an opportunity to pursue a campaign if they were not able to convince him the very first time for a very short amount of time. All he gave them was very short amount of time and just one chance. And if they were not able to explain that thing with simplicity to him, he believed that they can never, ever do a good job in the market. And he says that if you cannot condense your message on the back of an envelope he quotes, it's rubbish. A few people say that you've got to write your core message on the back of a visiting card, a business card. But, you know, I kind of get reminded of the school days where when someone gives us a challenge that you can't do it, we kind of make it possible to do it. So it's not like you take the back of a business card, write it very small for about 100, 200 words. But what it really means is ensure that it's 10 words or less. When you can say your core message in 10 words or less, that's how crystal clear you are. That's how focused you are with your message. And then you know that it is short, it is simple. This is my core message. Let me build my subject around this. So when I say keep it short and simple, I am asking you to not just be too short that people feel like, oh, he's not done anything. He just came, he left. Or it's too long that people wait for you to leave. Strike a balance in that optimum time limit. When you're given a time limit, stick to that time, because I personally believe, this is nobody's opinion but mine, you can definitely avoid it. Because what I believe is we might be valuable as speakers, but none of us are as invaluable as time, and especially somebody else's time. So when somebody else is giving us their time, it's our responsibility to make sure that we don't really take a little bit more than what they've given us, because it's extremely invaluable. So when they give you a time, stick to that time. Make sure you write a script that falls within that time limit. Practice and make sure that it's just that time limit. That's one. And it's not just short, it's also keeping it simple. A few things that we do which kind of complicates it. I have 3 scenarios. The first big flaw that we do sometimes is we kind of have too many messages in the same speech. So my first point for y'all is have only one central theme, one core message. Don't confuse with too many messages. One message and just one core message. Don't give multiple messages. You have another speech to deliver that. Reserve that for another speech. Deliver another speech. Build a content around that particular topic another time. But definitely stick to one core message. Multiple ways in which you can achieve that core message, but just one core message. Don't give us, I don't think we'll have to be like Christmas lights, giving mixed signals. We'll have to be like traffic lights. It's either red, yellow, and green. It has to be very clear. So don't give your audience mixed signs where they find it really difficult to take back a message. So stick to one message. The first confusion arises when there's multiple messages coming out of the speech. Now, the second case, you have only one message, but sometimes, especially as a beginner, we have this habit of overloading information. Now, there's an adage in the speaking fraternity where they say the more you squeeze in the content in your speech, the more you squeeze out your audience from your speech. So always remember that you've got to keep it less, because less is more sometimes. So strike that optimum balance. Don't have too many examples. If you're going to have a 7-minute speech, if you're going to give me 5 bullet points, it can only be for 1 minute each. And 1 minute is basically just mentioning the bullet point with 2 lines. So that's how small it would be. It wouldn't give me that impact that it's supposed to give me. So keep it minimal. If it's a 7-minute speech, look at 3 very medium-sized episodes packed together. If it's one elaborate story, 1 would do the trick. If it's a 20-minute session, I would still go with 3 examples or 3 techniques, because I can spend a considerable amount of time, at least say 5 minutes on each subject, and give some room for questions and answers. So make sure that you don't bombard your audience with a lot of information. Now, I've chosen only one topic, one central theme. I have only 3 things to say in the 7 minutes. But if I'm going to script my speech like Christopher Nolan's movies, people are not really going to love it like they love Nolan's movies. Let's face it. People love and talk about Nolan's movies after they've watched it 16 times and watched all of the YouTube reviews saying ending explained. Unfortunately, most of us don't get a chance to watch the speaker's speech again. So you've got to nail it right the first time. So when you're there on stage, you've got to keep it simple, because people will have to constantly connect with you, with the plot, and with the way you've structured things. It would be great if you have one scene explained, another scene explained randomly, another scene explained randomly. It would be great if I happen to watch a feature film where everything is so visual and I understand its different characters. But in a speech, complicated structures might be difficult for the audience to process. So the trick is to keep it short and simple, because like Richard Branson says, any fool can make things complicated. What is really hard is to keep it simple. So that was my second tip for you. Now, I'll move on to the third thing that I have for you, which is something I like to call the escalator technique. Now, the escalator, like you know, connects you from one level to another level. That's exactly how I want a person's speech to be, and that's how I want the speech to speak to me. I say this in cases of all speeches: humor, informative, motivational, persuasive, or marketing speeches. All of these speeches, I want this escalator technique to be there, and I'll tell you why. This is where your audience is right now. What I mean is their state of mind, their perspectives. This is exactly where the world is, where they see the world to be. Now, after your speech, this is where you want your audience to be. Let me make it a little more specific rather than being this generic. Let me give you an example. Organic farming. This is where the world is with, like right now there's COVID. Right now the world is filled with so much of difficulty in procuring things. Now, we had so much of struggle during the lockdown to procure even vegetables, especially when the lockdown was announced in the beginning. What really happened was we struggled to get those vegetables. But what if we had a kitchen garden and it was organically, cultivated? What really would happen? You would have had your food available just even with those small few little ingredients that you have. You would have reaped the benefits of your labor. So that is exactly how it would have been if you had cultivated a few vegetables and fruits in your house or in your terrace. So also, chemicals are really unhealthy, but natural fertilizers are good. There's so much of cancer going on around the world, and there's so much attributed to the food we eat and only to the food we eat. This is how the world will be. You can give a lot of reasons, and I'm sure that organic farming is anyway going to definitely hands down win. So this is where the world is right now. And you want your audience to buy into the fact that they want organic, you want them to pursue organic farming. You want them to start cultivating their own food. You want them to grow their food. So you want a greener India. This is where you want your audience to be. So I want your speech to be that instrument, to be that tool that takes me from this stage to that stage. Not very abruptly like this, but in a very smooth way where you take me from this state to this state. And that is why I call it the escalator technique. Now, the problem though that happens in speeches is we sometimes concentrate too much on where they are and don't concentrate on where they will be if they follow that technique. We concentrate on where they are and we don't tell them how life would be if they happen to pursue that particular thing, or if they happen to follow your advice, or how different the world would be if you don't follow this advice. Like, for example, right now you're being so reckless. This is where the world will be in 2050 because of global warming. And that's because of all that you're doing. And this is not a place you want to be. But there has to be these two levels. And you have to bridge the gap between these two levels. And this is what I call the escalator technique. You take me from one level to the other by concentrating on where they are and take me to where they will be or where you want them to be. So from what is to what will be, or from what was to what is right now in the market. Like, for example, if you're doing a persuasive speech or a marketing speech, you say, this is exactly how the market was until my product came into the market. This is exactly how the market is because of the performance of my product. You take me between both of these levels through your speech, not abruptly, but very slowly. So I want you to concentrate on the present situation and take me to a future situation. This is true in the case of motivational speeches too, because your audience are right now in this mindset. They have something, they have a thought of their own, but you want to transport them to something else. Let us say not to waste food. You're trying to talk to their emotions about not wasting food. You talk about a situation where hunger prevailed and there's so many people who suffered. You want to touch that emotional part of your audience. You take them from this sophisticated environment that they're living and you transport them to that situation where they feel the hunger and they realize that, yes, this is exactly where I want to be. So your speech will have to concentrate on how was the world before your concept came in, and how will the world be, or how do you want your audience to be because of the concept you're trying to tell them. Am I clear until now? Few more yeses.
Yes, yes.
Yes, yes, very clear.
Yes.
Great. Thank you so much. So, thanks. So, thank you so much. I'm having a few yeses pouring in. While that's pouring in, I'll move on to my fourth tip, which is very related to the third tip. I talked about two levels, and I'm talking about a stark difference between both these levels and how they can be connected, which kind of brings me to my fourth level, my fourth tip rather, where I talk about this one simple, really underrated technique, but has a lot of impact if you happen to use it in your speeches. Now, I remember as a child, a friend once asked me, I don't know if the 20s kids still do that. Back in the 90s, these kids, they used to come with some silly, stupid riddles. Wouldn't make sense sometimes, but sometimes it'd be really exciting, but we always had answers for that. Something which wouldn't make sense, or something that would make sense, but would not be the answer they'd expect. But this was one such tricky question where my friend drew a line. She took a chalk, she drew a line in the basketball court, and she said, Hema, make this line shorter. The only thing is you're not supposed to erase this line. Now, I'm sure that most of us would have heard this riddle in our lives, I guess. So how do you reduce this line without touching that line? By drawing another line, as simple as that. So when you're kids, you're so dumb you can't think this. But I think now it makes more sense, and it's so easy for us to guess that you can make this line short by drawing something longer than this. And that is the power of relativity. More times than not, we are never judged absolutely. We are always judged relatively. People think relatively than of absolutely more times than not. I'm a firstborn. How many firstborns in the house? So say yes. Yes? Yeah?
Yes.
Yes.
Great. So our
Yes.
parents, if you're not a single child, and our parents chose to make one mistake or two maybe, it then comes to us because we're always compared to the other sibling. It does not just happen with the firstborns, it happens with the second as well. They get compared to us in a few aspects, we get compared to them in a few aspects. So they just want the absolute perfect baby, but it's always compared relatively to the other. So absolutely, you might be fine. Actually, all of us would have been horrible kids, but it does not matter. But relatively, it just makes it worse, which is exactly what I'm asking you to do in your speech, which is to leverage the power of contrasts or extremes. Now, when you say that this is a big thing, show me something that is small right next to it. Now, this big would seem bigger. The trick to making me buy a topic is to make sure that you give me in large sizes, packed with a lot of emotion and logic. And to do that, it really works a lot if you compare it with something very small. So leverage the power of contrasts or extremes. Before you say that this is great, say how horrible the situation would be without this. Or even without this, how horrible the situation is right now. It's related to the escalator thing, because one way of achieving the escalator is by saying how bad the situation is, and you compare it with something that is extremely good, which is your idea, which is your concept, your product, and you say this is better. Now this product kind of grows from here to here when you start really showing the difference that exists between both of these things. And this can be achieved when you contrast it. But here is the second part to it. More times than not, people take you through the struggle. Now, before you give me some water, if you really give me some water, like say after I get inside your house after taking a lift to your house, I wouldn't really appreciate it. Let us say the lift does not work and you live in the 12th floor. I'll have to climb all over there. And when I sit over there, I'd appreciate that water more than anything, which is kind of what I want you to do. You kind of elaborate on the problem and make me long for that solution. But the problem is, more times than not, we don't concentrate on the solution as much as we concentrate on the problem. But here's the thing, all of us love happy endings. We are so human that we want everything to be hopeful in life. The cynic always is cynical because he thinks it cannot happen, but he still wants to hear that it can happen so that he can continue to be that cynic. So whatever you say, people really want to be revived from that lowest point. They want to be up. They want to feel their hopes are really up after listening to you speak. They go to a movie because they want to get away from the reality that's there. Even if it's going to be reality, if there's a really sad ending, it disturbs us for no reason. So people love happy endings, or in other words, when you run me through a lot of struggles, give me the payoff. When you talk a lot about the negatives, make sure that you talk more about the positives so that it really makes me feel good. So the trick is to use contrasts to enhance the power of what you're trying to say. But the trick is also you concentrate more on what you really want the audience to take home. If the case is you want to make them feel guilty, you've got to make sure that this is exactly how bad it's going to be. But if you choose to really follow the right way, then global warming can be averted. Then all of these situations can be averted. All of these other things. So talk about struggles, but definitely give me the payoffs, because you take me all the way down, and if you're not going to revive my spirit up, the audience is not really going to like it. That brings me to the fifth tip that I have for you. Now, this, I thought I'd have it as the last one, but this is a very generic one. I thought I'd put this under this one bucket. It's a big bucket in which I'm going to put in a few things, but I'm not going to elaborate all of them. I'm going to only elaborate one. Now, this bucket that I'm going to talk about, before I talk to you about that, let me tell you about this Swiss engineer somewhere in the 1920s, I think, or probably in the 1800s. So he was just out there in the woods on a hunting trip with his dog. And when he came back home, he realized that in his fur, in his coat and in his dog's fur, there was a few things that were stuck to both his coat and the dog's fur. He tried to remove it. It was just not coming out. And this guy, being an engineer, he happened to then realize that there was small little, these seedlings of this plant or this bush that was stuck to the coat. So he took it off and he examined under the microscope. And he happened to then discover and patent this one thing. What thing am I talking about? This really famous thing. Yes, and I think the answer is there. Velcro. Velcro, close, not the zip, but Velcro, because Velcro is that one thing, if you see, it has a lot of hooks that stick to the other surface. Now, how Velcro works is similar to the way those little seedlings from the bush was. If you look at it, it had a lot of hooks, and this hook was what kind of latched itself to the fabric. That's exactly the concept in which Velcro was invented. So he basically had one surface, if you've seen, it has one surface filled with all these hooks, the other surface which is a little abrasive so that it kind of sticks. The thing about Velcro is one square inch of Velcro, if it has adequate amount of hooks, can lift up to 75 kgs, which is close to the average weight of a human being. 1 square inch of Velcro with adequate hooks can lift a human being. And I think if the more the hooks are in something so small as Velcro to hold on to a human being, something so powerful as a speech, if it has adequate hooks in it, can hold your audience in when you deliver that message. So my fifth point for you is to use a lot of hooks, or anchors as they call them, so that you anchor your message. You hook your audience in and you anchor that message in the minds of your audience. Now, there are a lot of hooks that you can use. So I want you guys to tell me what are the different hooks you've seen people use, you have used, which has worked for you. I will not be elaborating on all of those things. I'm going to leave it to you guys to do a little bit of homework and research on it, except one, which I'll just touch upon a little bit. But I want you all to tell me, what do you think are the different anchors or hooks that we can use in our speech? These are more like elements of a speech in which you can hook your audience and get them inside your speech. So what are those things? Stories, question, humor, suspense, appeal to emotions. Keep it coming. All of them right. Suspense, okay. Emotions, anecdotes, stories, yes. Personal story, anecdotes, stories, setups. And by that, I think you're talking about building the suspense. What's a setup? I don't understand what a setup is. Can you elaborate on that, Abhinav, in the chat? So personal story, motivation, involving the audience, great. Stunning facts, great. So all right, all correct, all correct. So I know you ask a few questions and you kind of hook your audience in. You say a startling fact and you say like, oh, wow, is that really true? And you hook your audience in. You can use anecdotes and say, hey, this happened in my life. And you hook your audience in. You can use general stories and, kind of hook them in, because stories by far are the best hook you can ever use in a speech, because human beings love stories. Human brains rather love, just love stories. So it hands down wins and kind of tops everything, which is not going to be the thing I'm going to talk about today. So there's a lot of twists, wordplay, great. And I saw humor, which is undoubtedly one of the best things that you can have in your speech. Definitely a hook that will get more people involved and invested in your speech, because I always feel like you don't laugh with someone who's there on the road. You laugh with people you feel like a family or friends. So when a speaker makes me laugh, I subconsciously start trusting him and I feel like, hey, this guy, I kind of feel like family with him. I kind of feel like friends with him. So that's kind of the subconscious reaction that goes on when someone is humorous. You start liking them, you start trusting them, and then you start buying what they try to say. So humor makes you feel, makes you very relatable with the audience, very accepted with the audience. So humor is definitely another very, very great hook that you can use. There's twists, plots, suspenses that you can use totally. Yes, you can have those little bit of suspense that can keep the audience, at the edge of their seats. Totally. But make sure that you don't complicate the plot, like we discussed in technique 2. So with that said, I think it stopped for some time. Someone said wordplay. Can you give me a more wordplay can be definitely attributed to humor, of the different types and techniques that's there in humor. Wordplay is one such very strong thing that can happen. But what's the other bucket in which you can club wordplay? That was another point that I wanted to mention. So what bucket can you club wordplay in? Another bucket that we can use. No answers? It's got the word in it. I mean, I kind of gave the answer away.
Rhyming, I
what's
think Kruba gave rhyming.
I just couldn't hear that.
I think Kriba gave rhyming. Rhyming?
Rhyming?
Yes.
Rhyming, okay. Rhyming, yes, you can make it rhyme. So I wanted puns, yes, different types. You're giving me different types in which we can use the language. So what's that bucket, that common thing that we call it? What's that thing? CC4 talks about this thing by and large. How you say it? Rhetorical devices or figures of speech. Yes, the rhetoric. From none other than, without any, it's a no-brainer, from Thomas Sir. So rhetorical devices or figures of speech. Similarly, someone's just mentioned that. Alliterations, yes, exactly. That's exactly what I'm talking about. Puns, your wordplay, alliterations, triads, similes, or more commonly analogies, metaphors, repetition, the power of repetition, like I see something, or how Aaron Beverly happened to use and I take it very seriously. So he kind of repeated it over and over again for the effect of humor. It can be to even reinforce the message. I see something, I don't know what it is. It can even be to reinforce your message or to give that punch and that humor, but at the end of the day, it's memorable. So the more rhetorical devices you have, the more beautiful it is. but it's not really necessary that it has to be loaded with such beautiful grammar and such beautiful complicated sentences. Let's keep it simple, but let's also add in a little bit of elegance with that rhetorical devices. Now, with all of that said and done, my fifth point of anchors or hooks, I was going to elaborate on one such rhetorical device, which I hold as the number one, hook that you can use, element that you can use in your story, and an element that I think makes all the difference. Because I think it was Maya Angelou who said, people forget what you tell them, they forget what you do, but they never forget how you make them feel. Because at the end of a speech, your audience is supposed to think, feel, or act differently. Think, feel, or act. A few speeches make you think, oh, all these days I thought that mutual funds were wrong, but this guy proved me wrong. So I start thinking about the same topic with a different perspective. And then certain speeches make me feel differently. Someone comes and talks. I remember my friend delivering a speech on her roommate's dad dying. It made me feel so bad because I love my dad and I can't hear anybody's dad dying, not even watch it in the movies. So when I see someone that close dying, it was a club speech and I was just tearing as the speech was just happening. I was the evaluator. I could not note anything because it was so heavy. It made me feel differently after that. Her message was, you don't know when you lose your loved one. The girl never expected it. So that kind of made me feel differently. My God, I love my father so much. I was so happy and all before the session, but after the meet, I felt really, really heavy in my heart and made me feel differently towards, correct, right? So ego, why ego? We should like let go of it. This is how I felt. But certain speeches make you act on it. Now, if I'd stopped over there without doing anything, which I did, okay, because I usually am very expressive to my family. So I kind of don't hold back and all. So I never had to go to my father that day, hug and say, Daddy, I love you and all. I never did that. But if I had done that, if I'd said like every day, I would never fight with my daddy. I would like never get out of the house with such an angry face, because I don't know what can happen to who, not just dad, but mom, friend, anybody. If I'd done that, that's a speech that, invoked a certain amount of action in my life. So I act on what you're trying to say. So your speech at the end of the day will have to make your audience think differently than what they really did before the speech, or at least feel differently, because you appeal to their emotions and you make them feel a little different. And the best part is when you make them act, you give them a call to action and you make them act. That is really a transformative speech, and that's a level apart. So with that said, there is one small rhetorical device that you can use in your speeches to make sure that your audience feel that way, and you just know for a fact that your audience will not forget you, because they don't forget the way you make them feel. So in order to make your audience feel a lot of what you feel, this is that rhetorical device that helps do that. What do you think is the rhetorical device I'm talking about? I'll make it a little more simple for you. Now, when the Spanish flu happened, none of us ever knew what happened, except it happened in Spain, and it happened in the early 90s. Early 1920s or 1910s, I don't know. So that's when it happened, and I don't remember. But when someone talks to you 50 years from now about the coronavirus, we would for a fact say that it happened in 2019. It extended to 2020, and that's all that 2020 was filled with. We can't say how the first month was, the second month was, to much detail, because we lived to tell that tale. Now, if you really live something, you're not going to forget that thing. History kind of is boring and you forget it because you've not lived it. Now, when you see news and you see like, oh, this is what happened, you forget it. But you don't forget that dialogue in that movie which you felt, where you felt that emotion that the hero was going through. So when someone is going through something, we are hardwired to go through the same thing, because there's something called the mirror neurons in our mind. That's something like the monkey say, monkey do thing. Have you seen babies? You do something, they imitate you. Have you seen how when you're really hungry and someone there's an advertisement going on about I don't know, this big fat burger, and you start salivating, and it's like, my God, I really feel more hungry. Why do you feel what somebody else is feeling? It kind of accentuates all of what they're feeling. That's because of what this mirror neurons does. You feel what the other person feels, or in other words, as an audience, I start feeling what my speaker feels. I put myself in my speaker's shoes. When my speaker is going through a low, I start feeling bad with him. When my speaker has found that joy in his life, I start feeling happy for him, and I start feeling happy for no reason. Now, why does this happen? It's because he made me live that tale along with him. So the trick that I'm going to tell you is, when you live your speech on stage, your audience live it along with you. And the way to achieve it, I said those three are the taboo words, so I'm not going to talk about delivery. The way to achieve it in your script is to describe your story by involving all of the senses. Or in other words, the most popular one of all, imagery. When you use a lot of imagery, where you describe not just what you see, but what you hear, what you smell, what you taste, what you touch, what you feel, your audience start feeling it with you. So when you write, make sure you describe, but not to too much detail where it bores the audience, and they kind of get like, okay, what exactly is the other thing that he's trying to describe? Now, we'll have to remember that we're not writing a novel where we'll have to describe everything to the smallest detail. We'll have to strike an optimum balance, but we'll also have to understand that what has to be described has to be described. That description that you arrive at with imagery is, according to me, the most powerful way of expressing it. What you feel, you can make your audience feel by bringing it to words. Because hands down, any day, I think it was an American neuroscientist who said, we are not thinking beings that feel, we are rather feeling beings that think. I'll repeat, we're not thinking beings that feel, we are rather feeling beings that think. So any day a human's emotion is going to far outweigh his logic, which kind of means the more you touch his emotion, he will even change his logic about a particular thing. But the point and the trick is, you've got to hit him in his emotion. And the way to do it is to include a lot of imagery and make sure you live your experience through those words and your audience live it along with you. Now, 5 tips. Again, a small little recap. What's the first one? Someone, anyone? The first one.
Begin with the end in the mind.
Begin with the end in the mind. Great. The second one.
Keep it short and simple.
Great. Keep it short and simple. So first you begin with a core message, and then you start scripting and forming layers, but you keep it short and simple, not too complicated. The third one, how can you achieve more impact?
Escalator technique.
The escalator technique. And what do you basically do in the escalator? You
take a person from
Concentrate
one
on
level
the
to
present situation.
Great.
Load
You
the
take,
Where we want to take them.
great. You take him from the present to where you want them to be. And then the third one, I think I've got a lot of answers saying use the power of contrast. Contrast and extremes is the fourth one. And the fifth and the last one, which we spoke about.
Make them to live with our content of our speech.
Great. You make them live with the with our content. Use hooks, and of all the hooks we discussed about imagery and how we can make our audience live with it. So with that said, I think I'll open the floor to questions right now. I just hand it over to my.
Ma'am, already we got a question, and I'll just see what is the question. So how to write your humorous speech from Anand? Hello. Already we got a question. How to write a humorous speech from Anand?
No, I mean that how should we script for a conclusion in a humorous speech?
Oh, okay. So the one thing is how to script for the conclusion when it comes to humorous speech only, is it? So I'll tell you what, any speech for that matter, the conclusion will have to still reinforce what you're trying to say right from the beginning. Your core message will have to be reinforced because it's something called the power of recency. People remember those last words, and when they're like, really impactful, they'll be the lasting words. So you've got to make sure that your core message is reinforced over there, even in the end, any speech. And you've got to make sure that when you take them to that tipping point in that V shape, where you take them from where they are and you hit that point where you want them to be, it can even be a peak. So it can be the reverse. So if it's a very emotional or very, make them feel guilty kind of thing, you take them to that point where it tips then. So it can be an inverted V as well. So if it's like a mountain, you take them to the peak and then you want them to tip and then you start concluding it. And when you start concluding it, you still will have to make sure that you have their hopes up. Now, this is the general rule. Humor, what is the core message? Again, your core message will have to be reinforced. But one small thing that you'll have to follow in humor is to make sure that you end with the best joke. The best joke, you just end it because that's where you're going to make your audience laugh and leave. The second best joke, I think you can have it in the very, very beginning, because that's again where you want your audience to laugh. So you get your audience inside your speech very beginning, you leave them with a lasting impression at the very end. So best joke at the end, the second best joke in the beginning. So that's about how you end your humorous speech.
Sure, ma'am.
Hello,
Thank you.
madam. Hello, I wrote one speech. In that, I'm getting 3-4 conclusions. Can I include 3-4 conclusions in the conclusions?
So, like I said, okay. So, what is that one message that you want your audience to be with? If it's a lot of questions, I have these many questions, 3-4 conclusions is fine. But what is that one thing that you want your audience to go home with? Like, for example, you can be left with 3-4 conclusions. Like if it's a humorous speech, especially, you'll be left with so many conclusions. If it's something very light and entertaining, definitely yes. But what is that one thing that you really like the most? You can go with it, because that's one way of really achieving it. If it's a very light, humorous, entertaining speech, go with which one you think is like getting the most response. Try it out with audiences. If it's not a humorous speech, if it's very serious, if you have one particular point, then you one way or the other boil down to one thing. If it's going to be a persuasive speech, you're going to either ask them to vote for or against. So is it for or is it against? So that is going to be your conclusion. The way you conclude, if you have multiple ways of reinforcing the same message, then pick the best. But if your message itself is 4 different things, you will have to start reworking it. What is the one message that was conveyed throughout the speech? Have that as your conclusion.
Okay.
I think it's 8:02. Can we take all the question offline, ma'am? Is that fine?
Great, sure. I will take it offline. Yeah. So before I close the session, I kind of had this quote that was circulated for the session. It talked about art and science, and I think public speaking is both an art and science. And in art, it's about how you express oneself. It's very personal, where you go from yourself and go on to express yourself, which is kind of the same thing that you do with public speaking as well. But the thing about science is you've got to make sure that you make it a little more universal, which is where all of these techniques came into picture. I told you all of the techniques, which is the science part of it. But the art part of it is still about expressing yourself. And like I've said, any day, human emotions trump human logic. So more than the science, the art always outweighs it. And I think people always will appreciate Da Vinci for creating the Mona Lisa, and nobody is going to ever appreciate someone for recreating the Mona Lisa. So the one thing that I'd want to leave you all with, the only one message, is the art of public speaking will always have to outlive the science of public speaking. And by that, I mean people buy in the person that you are, the speaker that you are. So don't recreate templates that's there. Express yourself with the help of these techniques that you learn, and a lot more techniques that's available. And the more you start expressing yourself, that's when you really transform from a good speaker to a great speaker. So with that said, thank you so much, TLI, for hosting me.